And welcome back to Flo's Sports Fix as we take a look now at a movie that's being released this week, a very special film for those of us who love the club and have been a fan and been involved in the club since we set foot on this earth. It is about the Port Adelaide Footy Club. It's called This Is Port Adelaide, and we're joined by the director right now, Nicole Miller. G'day, Nicole. How are you today?
Hi, good, thank you.
So firstly, Nicole, are you a Port Adelaide fan?
I am.
Oh, that made it easy, didn't it?
Yeah. I think, making a film like this, if you weren't a fan at the beginning of it, you would have been by the end of it.
Were you a footy fan before it all, or you just was a whole new experience and you just fell in love with it as you were doing it?
Originally I wasn't a football fan, but I did a few projects with the Port Adelaide Football Club a few years ago, sort of back in 2016, when they were first doing their push into China.
Okay.
So I came on as a bit of an outsider to explain football, AFL, and like some of the history of the Port Adelaide Football Club to a Chinese audience. And in doing that, it was sort of my introduction to the club as well. And from there, I've sort of learned more about them and become invested in the people and that work so hard and the community. And so I'm a bona fide fan now.
I guess you got to see, inside the walls that many of us don't, even the fans, we don't get to see it. And so you got to see things that none of us got to see, which would certainly help with that and shine a different light. But I'm just curious to know, when you were trying to explain the game to the Chinese and maybe even to some other people around the state that go for the other club, maybe they should watch this and understand that a bit more as well. But how did you go explaining it to them? Because I'd find that... Yeah, how do you do it to someone that's got no idea or concept of the sport altogether?
Yeah, well, I think that's where it was sort of... I teamed up with my editor, who was a mad AFL fan, and it was sort of balanced out by I was a bit of an outsider, so I was kind of throwing out the questions of, okay, was this clear enough? Or, maybe it might confuse audiences, this particular play. Like, I wasn't quite clear what was going on, so let's break that down. So, it was very much like... there was a few different elements to it. There was a bit of a documentary element following the Chinese player that they had over to the club and sort of his journey. And then even just literally kind of explaining and unpacking some of the rules and some of the highlights from particular games, just to kind of, give that foundation so it was accessible for an audience that had sort of had no idea what AFL was.
And what was the reaction like?
Yeah, we got good viewing from all the feedback from China.
Excellent.
And I think it did help, in that first year when they were doing their first game in Shanghai, it was, it helped build a bit of an audience and build a bit of an understanding before they even got over there. So,
well, this current project, it's in cinemas. It opens from this week, April the 22nd. It's called This Is Port Adelaide. So how did this project, how did you get involved with this? Did the club just ask you? And specifically, what is it all about?
Yeah, so we still have this relationship with the club. So we've worked with them on a few different projects over the last few years. So we were sort of in conversation, I think it was 2018, as early as that, just knowing that they had their 150th anniversary coming up. So, for us as filmmakers, we were like, that's pretty significant. We've got to help tell this history and tell this story. And initially we were sort of, thinking, can it be a chronological television special, or which we did go on to do. But then, as documentary filmmakers, we thought, well, you know what, there's actually a bigger story here, and there's quite a universal story here, which is about how much football means to people and what the Port Adelaide Football Club has done for the community and how the community is such an integral part to the club. Because we felt like that's something that's quite unique about this club, how kind of genuinely it seems people care about each other and there's that strong connection between the community and the club.
Coming from that area, that's where I grew up in the area when I was a wee lad, and it's you bleed black and white. That's the way it was growing up, and
my first family home was in Birkenhead. So
okay, yep.
I had that claim.
Yes, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Birkenhead's a good spot. And so, to me, that was it. Growing up, it was black and white, and going to school, there would be kids that supported other teams, and and they were your friends, so you kind of accepted it, but you'd gravitate more to the Port Adelaide ones. And I'm just sort of watching the trailer that's running on my screen here, and I'm seeing some images here that are taking me right back. So how hard was it to get some of that archival footage?
Yeah, a big part of that, I think, some of that is a bit of nostalgia, and it's telling the story of, I think your experience and a lot of people's experiences growing up, just how fundamentally connected Port Adelaide was to their lives or to their experience in childhood growing up or to the area. We really wanted to kind of capture that and have that element come across in it as well, because that's a big part of the personality of the club.
Were you finding that it was you were talking to like generations that had just followed the club right through, that it was granddad passed it down all the way through?
Yeah, definitely. That's something that's really unique about this club and the history of this club, is that intergenerational kind of tradition of following it, that people pass it on as something special for their children and grandchildren to understand and appreciate. Something that really, as one of the oldest clubs in Australia, it's sort of something special and a tradition that people want to pass on to the next generation. So, each generation sort of has its own unique story and a different era of the club that it's lived through. But people have experienced, wartime stories, or in the 80s and 90s, and the SANFL sort of days, and then obviously the transition into the AFL. A young supporter today, they have a very different understanding or reason why they support the club, but you sort of got that history behind it that feeds all the way through.
Yes, that history, and I'm just looking at it, and it's just, it's bringing back lots of memories to me of going to games at Alberton and at Footy Park and at Unley Oval. I'm just thinking about the ovals that I went to and in Elizabeth to follow Port Adelaide as I was growing up, and to me, that Saturday game, it wasn't so much supporting your team, but it was also catching up with the extended family that you only saw on a Saturday through footy season as well. Yeah,
and I think that's where that kind of community side of it comes in. It's, initially, people may think it's just a football club. But if you try and look at it with that bigger lens, it's sort of, well, what does it mean to Australians? What has it meant to Australians? And it's meant that place where people come together, or where they find people with similar values that they can sort of connect with. Like you said, I think you sort of gravitated towards some of the kids at school that went for Port. There's a good quote from one of our fans in the film where he sort of says, like, if I really get along with someone, I think, like, and I realised later on that they're a Port Adelaide fan. I think, I knew it. I knew you were a Port Adelaide fan. There was something good about you. So it's sort of like this shared values that helps connect you.
They certainly are. And I'm sure this is about Port Adelaide, and that's the documentary that you've done, I'm sure it would relate to any other of the football clubs throughout the AFL and that, and other sporting codes in that as well. So I get all that.
Yeah.
And then what was the thing that surprised you the most doing this?
What surprised me, I guess just maybe the depth of the history. That was something maybe presented as more of a challenge in terms of making a documentary that was speaking to the 150 years, because you can't feature everyone that contributed to the club or everyone that helped shape what it is today, and so many different eras and kind of legends of the club. I think that was part of, I was surprised by how challenging that was, sort of selecting what stays in and what feeds into this narrative and what doesn't. And then I guess just probably the breadth of people in the community and fans that we met, and just hearing everyone's individual stories, why they're so passionate about this club, what it means to them or their family. Some people had tragic incidences in their life early on that found strength through Port Adelaide Football Club and coming together with their friends and sort of extended Port Adelaide family. So I think it was just, how much it has had an impact on so many people.
And the emotions, you sort of touched on it a bit there, but the emotions and that passion that is through people, and seeing grown men cry when things happen, and that it's what we love about sport, and when you identify it with a club, it really gets to you, and I just think it's absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for doing this, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. I've watched the trailer about 20 times, and it just keeps rolling back. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the film. But I did want to ask you something, Nicole. That now I love sport movies. I don't care what the sport is. I will watch it if it's, and I sort of have a view that if it's in a movie and it's about a sport, then it's a legitimate sport. And so I just love them. So what is it about Australia that we don't seem to really embrace sport movies, say, as much as like the Americans do and in other parts of the world? What is it? I mean, I loved Ride Like a Girl, the recent film about Michelle Payne, but when I've mentioned it to others, they've gone, and it's like, well, it's a great film. What is it about us that doesn't seem to want to embrace sport movies?
Yeah, I'm not sure, because you think about how much, as a culture, how much we love sport.
Yeah.
And sport definitely is just, it's drama anyway. It's the perfect fodder for a story, because it's full of stories, and every game is its own story. So, I think it's pretty ripe for watching. I suppose maybe it's just us looking out a lot. We do tend to look out to other cultures. I think it's in recent years that we're starting to look at ourselves as a society and start to look at what we're interested in, and start to tell stories that are more unique to us. I think it's kind of maybe as a youngish culture. Yeah. We're sort of, still exploring and understanding ourselves, and then telling those stories back to us.
Because the reason I sort of wanted to ask that, because I'm sure when you were going through the old footage and hearing some of those old stories, the director in you must have been sitting there making notes thinking, gee, this would be a good film. I could turn this into a film. Surely you must have been thinking that with some of the stories you heard.
Oh, yeah, you could make 1,000 films out of, some of the stuff that we uncovered during this one film. There's so many different tangents and so many different stories. There's kind of wartime stories. There's individual people's, the story of their lives, which is interwoven with the football club. So, you could. There's so many stories that kind of come off of this long history.
Well, I hope you get to do one. I really do, because I'd certainly love to see it. Because I just love sport movies, and it doesn't matter to me what it is. If I see one on TV, I'll just stop and watch it, even if I've seen it 20 times before. I just love them. But I just love them.
Yeah, there's. I'm sure many rusted-on fans are familiar with Bob Quinn and his story. So he served in war, and he became a decorated war hero, and came back and joined the club, and went on to do really well despite kind of injuries from the war. So you just think of, that alone is such a interesting part of history, and yet we couldn't even, so it wasn't really part of our narrative, so we couldn't feature it. But you hear all of these stories, and they're all so interesting, and kind of, we've got a lot of our own history, I think, still to tell and explore.
Well, we need you to start telling more of those stories, Nicole, so we need you to do it. But anyway, we've got this film. It is called This Is Port Adelaide, and it's part of the Adelaide Film Festival. It's on screening this week. I can see it on Wednesday at the Palace Nova East End in Adelaide, also at the Wallace Mitcham Cinemas, and I'll be looking forward to seeing it. You're also going to screenings around the country as well. It's in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and also in Perth, so I'm sure you're going to be having a good time talking about Port Adelaide. Thank you so much for sharing it with us today. It's absolutely great. I cannot wait to see it. And thank you so much for spending time with us on Flow. And good luck with everything else, Nicole.
Amazing. Thanks so much for the Port Adelaide chat.